In the spring of 1850, Reverend Isaiah Crawford stood at the pulpit of the New Hope Baptist Church in Greene County, Alabama, and told his congregation that blood would flow in the Black Warrior River within a fortnight. He was 42 years old, thin as a rail from years of modest eating and hard living, and he had never been known to make dramatic pronouncements. He preached practical sermons about loving your neighbor and being honest in your dealings, and he ran his small church with quiet competence rather than fiery passion. So when he spoke those words on that warm Sunday morning in April, the 70 people packed into the wooden pews went silent with surprise. Isaiah had not planned to say it. The words had come from somewhere deeper than conscious thought, rising up through his chest and out of his mouth, before he fully understood what he was saying. He stood gripping the edges of the pulpit, looking out at faces he had known for 15 years, and felt as shocked as they looked. The sermon he had prepared was about patience and perseverance, not about blood in rivers. But the image had been burning in his mind for 3 days now, ever since he had walked along the riverbank and felt something wrong in the air, something that tasted like copper on the back of his tongue. His wife Sarah sat in the front row with their 2 daughters, Martha and Grace. Sarah's expression was carefully neutral, but Isaiah could read the concern in her eyes. She knew him well enough to understand that he would not say something like this without reason, but she also knew the danger of making predictions that sounded like prophecy. Greene County was Baptist territory, but it was also practical territory where people valued common sense over mysticism. After the service, Isaiah stood at the church door shaking hands and accepting questions he did not know how to answer. What did he mean by blood in the river? Was it a metaphor? Was he speaking literally? Had God given him a vision? Isaiah deflected as best he could, saying only that he felt strongly that danger was coming to the river, and people should be careful near it for the next 2 weeks. Some nodded seriously, others looked skeptical. Old Thomas Brennan clapped him on the shoulder and said, "You feeling all right, Reverend? You look peaked." Sarah waited until they were home, until the girls were playing in the yard, and the midday meal was laid out on the table before she asked him directly, "What did you see, Isaiah?" He sat down heavily in his chair, suddenly exhausted. "I don't know if I saw anything, Sarah. I walked by the river 3 days ago, checking on the Simmons family down near the bend, and something felt wrong. The water looked normal, the fish were jumping like always, but I felt this dread settle over me like a physical weight. And I keep seeing it in my mind, the water turning red, people gathering on the banks looking afraid, something terrible happening." Sarah served him cornbread and beans, her movements efficient and calm. She had been married to him for 18 years and had learned to take his instincts seriously. Isaiah was not given to flights of fancy or dramatic gestures. If he said something felt wrong, it probably was. "Did you see what causes it, this blood in the water?" "No, just the aftermath. The red water, the fear. I don't know if it's literal blood or something else that makes the water look that way. I don't know if people die or just lose property. I just know it's coming, and I needed to warn them." "They'll think you're trying to be a prophet," Sarah said quietly. "You know how people are about that sort of thing. Prophets are either holy men or charlatans, and most folks lean toward charlatan." Isaiah pushed his food around his plate without eating. "I know, but what else could I do? If something happens and I said nothing, how would I live with that?" They sat in silence for a moment, listening to their daughters laughing outside. Then Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. "Then we wait and see. And we pray you're wrong, even though we both know you're probably not." The news of Isaiah's warning spread through Greene County faster than gossip usually traveled. By Monday afternoon, half the county had heard about Reverend Crawford's strange pronouncement. Some people took it seriously and kept their children away from the river. Others laughed it off as Sunday dramatics from a preacher, trying to keep his congregation interested. A few began avoiding Isaiah altogether, uncomfortable with what they saw as presumption. Claiming to know the future was dangerously close to claiming divine knowledge, and that sort of thing could turn a respectable minister into a problematic figure very quickly. Isaiah went about his normal business, visiting sick parishioners, helping William Tucker repair his barn roof, preparing his Wednesday evening Bible study. He said nothing more about the river or his warning, but the words hung over him like a weight he could not put down. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that image: red water, frightened faces, something gone terribly wrong. The vision, if that was what it was, had not faded with time. Instead, it had grown stronger, more insistent, until he could hardly think about anything else. On Tuesday, he walked back to the river, drawn by a compulsion he did not fully understand. The Black Warrior River in this section was wide and slow-moving, bordered by dense stands of oak and pine trees. Plantations lined parts of it further south, using the water to transport cotton to Mobile. But here in Greene County, the river was still relatively wild. Isaiah stood on the muddy bank and watched the brown water flow past, looking normal and unremarkable. Fish jumped, birds called from the trees. A turtle sunned itself on a partially submerged log. Everything seemed peaceful, ordinary, exactly as it should be. But Isaiah felt that wrongness again, stronger now than it had been 3 days ago. The air felt thick, heavy with moisture, and something else he could not name. He knelt down and put his hand in the water, half expecting it to feel different somehow, but it was just river water. Cool and slightly murky, flowing over his fingers with gentle pressure. He pulled his hand back and wiped it on his trousers, feeling foolish and afraid in equal measure. "You really think something's coming?" a voice asked behind him. Isaiah turned to find Samuel Hawkins standing at the edge of the trees. Samuel was a free black man in his 30s, who ran a small farm on land his father had purchased after earning his freedom 20 years earlier. He was one of the few free black property owners in the county, and Isaiah had known him since Samuel was a boy. "I don't know what's coming, Samuel. I just know something is." Samuel walked down to stand beside him, looking out at the river with narrowed eyes. "My grandfather used to talk about the rivers back in Africa, how they would sometimes run red with clay after heavy rains upstream. Said it looked like blood, and people who didn't know better would think it was a curse or an omen. Maybe that's what you're seeing. Something natural that looks supernatural?" Isaiah considered this. "Maybe, but the feeling isn't about red water, Samuel. It's about danger. Something bad is going to happen here, and the red water is just part of it, or a sign of it, or a result of it. I can't explain it better than that." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I believe you. Don't know why exactly, but I do. My wife thinks I'm foolish for it, says you're just having nightmares and giving them too much weight. But I've learned to trust my instincts, and my instincts say you're seeing something real." He paused. "Question is, what do we do about it?" "I don't know. I warned people on Sunday. That's all I can think to do." "Might want to be more specific about what you're warning them against," Samuel suggested. "Telling people blood will flow in the river sounds biblical and vague. If you know more, if there are specific dangers people should watch for, you should say so." Isaiah shook his head in frustration. "But I don't know more. That's the problem. I see the result, but not the cause. I feel the danger, but I can't identify its source. How do you warn people about something when you don't understand it yourself?" They stood together in silence, watching the peaceful river flow past, both of them sensing something neither could name. Wednesday evening brought 30 people to Isaiah's Bible study, which was 15 more than usually attended. Isaiah was not naive enough to think the increased attendance reflected sudden spiritual awakening. They had come to evaluate him, to see if Sunday's strange pronouncement was an isolated incident or the beginning of something more concerning. In rural Alabama in 1850, there was a fine line between respected minister and dangerous eccentric, and Isaiah could feel himself being measured against that line. He taught from the book of Jonah, the story of a reluctant prophet sent to warn a city of coming destruction. He had not planned this lesson weeks ago when he set the schedule. It was pure coincidence that this particular text fell on this particular week, or perhaps not coincidence at all. Either way, he taught it straightforwardly, focusing on the themes of obedience and mercy, avoiding any obvious parallels to his own situation. But the subtext was impossible to ignore, and he saw people exchanging meaningful glances as he read about Jonah delivering his warning to Nineveh. After the study, Margaret Henderson approached him with her husband, Robert, standing supportively behind her. Margaret was in her late 50s, a pillar of the church, and a woman whose opinion carried weight in the community. "Reverend Crawford," she said, her voice low enough that others could not easily overhear, I want you to know that Robert and I take your warning seriously. We've moved our livestock to the upper pastures, away from the river bottom lands. Our son thinks we're being foolish, but better foolish than sorry." Isaiah felt gratitude wash over him. "Thank you, Margaret. I hope I'm wrong about all of this. I hope 2 weeks pass and nothing happens and everyone laughs at me for being an alarmist. But if I'm not wrong, at least some people will be prepared." Robert Henderson spoke up, his voice gruff but kind. "You've been our minister for 15 years, Isaiah. In all that time, you've never been one for dramatics or wild claims. That counts for something. If you say danger's coming, I believe you, even if I don't understand how you know." More people came to him after that, some offering support, others asking questions he could not answer. A few were openly skeptical, including James Whitfield, who owned one of the larger plantations south of town. "With all respect, Reverend," Whitfield said, his voice carrying across the emptying church, "what you're doing borders on fortune-telling, and that's not a Christian practice. You're worrying people unnecessarily and giving our church a reputation for superstition. I'd advise you to clarify on Sunday that you were speaking metaphorically, not literally." Isaiah met his eyes steadily. "I wasn't speaking metaphorically, James. I believe danger is coming to the river. I've said what I needed to say, and now it's up to each person to decide what to do with that information." Whitfield's expression hardened. "Then I hope you're prepared for the consequences when nothing happens, and people realize you've wasted their time and concern." He turned and left without saying goodbye. Sarah waited until everyone was gone before speaking. "He'll cause trouble for you if nothing happens. You know that." "I know." Isaiah extinguished the lamps one by one, watching shadows reclaim the church interior. "But what's the alternative? Stay silent and hope I'm wrong." "I can't do that, Sarah. Whatever's coming, it's getting closer. I can feel it like a pressure building in my chest." Thursday and Friday passed with agonizing slowness. Isaiah found himself constantly checking the sky, watching for signs of storms that might flood the river or cause some natural disaster. But the weather remained perfect. Clear skies, mild temperatures, gentle breezes that carried the sweet smell of blooming dogwood trees. Nothing suggested coming catastrophe. Isaiah began to doubt himself, began to wonder if Whitfield was right, and he had overreacted to a simple nightmare or moment of anxiety. On Friday afternoon, Samuel Hawkins came to find him with troubling news. "There's crews working upriver," Samuel said. "About 10 miles north of here. I heard about it from traders passing through. They're clearing land for a new plantation, cutting trees and moving earth to create fields. Big operation, lots of workers moving fast." Isaiah felt something click into place in his mind. How close to the river? Right on it, from what I heard. They're planning to use the river to transport their cotton, so they're building right up to the banks. Lot of displaced earth going into the water. Saturday morning, Isaiah saddled his horse and rode north along the river road, ignoring Sarah's concerns about him traveling alone. He needed to see this construction site for himself, needed to understand what was happening upriver that might explain the growing sense of dread that had not left him since Sunday. The road followed the river's curves, passing through dense forest and occasional clearings where small farms interrupted the wilderness. The day was warm and humid, typical for Alabama in late April, and Isaiah's shirt was damp with sweat by the time he had traveled 5 miles. At mile 7, he began to see the evidence. Trees had been felled along the riverbank, their stumps raw and exposed. The forest floor was torn up where logs had been dragged to the water for transport. Muddy tracks led from the cleared areas down to the river's edge. Isaiah dismounted and walked to the bank, looking down at water that seemed cloudier than it had been days ago, carrying more sediment, more disturbed earth from upstream activities. At mile 10, he reached the construction site itself, and what he saw made his stomach clench with understanding. Hundreds of acres had been cleared, a massive operation that had transformed dense forest into bare earth. Dozens of enslaved workers labored under the supervision of white overseers, cutting the remaining trees, burning brush, digging drainage ditches. The entire eastern bank of the river for a half-mile stretch had been carved away, reshaped, turned into something unrecognizable. And all that displaced earth, thousands of tons of red Alabama clay, was washing into the river with each rain shower, each bit of runoff, each disturbance of the newly exposed soil. Isaiah stood at the edge of the construction zone, watching the workers and understanding with sudden clarity what his vision had been trying to tell him. The blood in the river was not literal blood, it was red clay, Alabama's distinctive iron-rich soil that turned water the color of rust or dried blood when it washed into streams. This massive construction project was going to dump enormous amounts of that red clay into the Black Warrior River, turning the water red for miles downstream. And with that clay would come other things: debris, tree branches, displaced wildlife, possibly contamination that could sicken people, or livestock that drank from the river. A white man on horseback approached him, his expression suspicious. "You need something, preacher?" Isaiah recognized the tone. This was someone used to giving orders and having them followed. "Just passing through, observing. This is quite an operation you have here." "Carver Plantation," the man said with obvious pride. "Biggest land-clearing project in the county. We'll have 2,000 acres under cotton by next season. Mr. Carver bought this land last year, and he's not wasting time developing it." He looked at Isaiah more closely. "You got business here, or are you just curious?" "Curious," Isaiah said carefully, "and concerned. All this earth going into the river, you think about what that does to the water downstream?" The man shrugged. "River's big. It'll handle it. Besides, that's not our concern. Our concern is getting this land productive." His tone made it clear the conversation was over. Isaiah rode back slowly, his mind working through what he had seen. The vision was not about supernatural blood or divine judgment. It was about human activity and natural consequences. The river would turn red with clay within days, maybe a week at most. The sediment would make the water unsafe to drink, would clog fishing areas, would wash up on the banks in thick deposits. People who depended on the river for drinking water or fishing would be affected. Livestock that drank from it might get sick from the contamination. It was not a supernatural catastrophe, but it was a real one, and Isaiah had somehow sensed it coming before he understood the mechanism. When he reached home, he found Sarah in the garden. He dismounted and told her everything he had seen, explained his new understanding of what his warning had really been about. "So you weren't seeing a mystical vision," Sarah said when he finished. "You were seeing the natural consequences of that construction project. Your mind somehow put together clues you weren't consciously aware of, changes in the water, news of land clearing, whatever signals were there, and created that image of red water." "Maybe," Isaiah said. "Or maybe God shows us things in ways we can understand, using our own knowledge and observations. Either way, I need to refine my warning tomorrow, tell people specifically what's coming and why." Sunday morning arrived with perfect weather. The New Hope Baptist Church was more crowded on Sunday than Isaiah had ever seen it, with people standing along the walls and spilling out onto the front steps. Word had spread beyond the regular congregation, drawing curious onlookers, skeptics wanting to witness his failure, and genuinely concerned neighbors hoping for more information. Isaiah stood at the pulpit looking out at easily twice his normal congregation, feeling the weight of their expectations and doubts pressing down on him like a physical force. Sarah sat in her usual place with Martha and Grace, her expression calm and supportive, giving him strength he badly needed. He had prepared his sermon carefully, praying over every word, determined to be clear and specific rather than vague and dramatic. When the singing ended and the church fell silent, Isaiah opened his Bible but did not read from it. Instead, he spoke directly to the people gathered before him. "Last Sunday I told you that blood would flow in the Black Warrior River within a fortnight. I scared some of you, confused others, and made many of you doubt my judgment or my sanity. Today I want to explain what I meant and what I have learned since making that statement. I rode upriver yesterday to a place 10 miles north of here where a massive construction project is underway. The Carver Plantation is clearing 2,000 acres of forest right along the river's eastern bank. Thousands of tons of earth have already been displaced, and thousands more will be moved in the coming weeks. That earth is red Alabama clay full of iron, and when it washes into the river, it turns the water the color of blood." He paused, watching faces as people processed this information. Some nodded slowly, understanding dawning. Others still looked skeptical, waiting for more. Within the next week, probably sooner, That red clay is going to reach our section of the river. The water will turn red-brown and will stay that way for weeks or possibly months while the construction continues upstream. This will affect anyone who depends on the river for drinking water, fishing, or watering livestock. The sediment will make the water unsafe to drink without filtering or boiling it first. It will disrupt fishing by clouding the water and possibly driving fish elsewhere. It will leave thick deposits of clay on the banks that will take months to wash away. This is not a supernatural event or divine judgment. This is the natural consequence of large-scale land development, and it is going to cause real problems for real people. James Whitfield stood up in the middle of the church, his face red with anger or embarrassment or both. So you're saying your dramatic warning last week was just about muddy water? You scared half the county over some construction runoff? Isaiah met his eyes steadily. I'm saying that what I saw in my mind was red water and frightened people, and I warned you about it as best I could with the understanding I had at that time. I have now ridden upriver and seen the source of the problem, and I'm giving you more specific information so you can prepare. If you have wells for drinking water, you will be fine. If you depend on the river, you need to make other arrangements immediately. If you water your livestock from the river, find alternative sources or be prepared for possible sickness. If you fish the river for food or income, understand that the fishing will be poor for quite some time. Margaret Henderson stood up, her voice carrying clearly through the church. Thank you for the warning, Reverend Crawford, and for taking the time to investigate and give us specific guidance. My family has already moved our cattle to higher pastures, where they can drink from springs instead of the river. We will make sure our neighbors know to do the same. Other voices joined hers, some offering thanks, others still expressing doubt. Samuel Hawkins spoke from the back of the church, his voice calm and measured. I have family that depends on river fishing for part of their income. I will make sure they know what is coming and can adjust their plans accordingly. This is useful information regardless of how the Reverend came by it. The service continued with more discussion than usual, people asking questions and sharing information about who might be most affected and how to help them. Isaiah felt the mood in the church shift from skepticism and concern to something more productive. Practical problem-solving, community coordination, the kind of mutual support that rural communities depended on for survival. By the time he dismissed the congregation, plans were being made to share well water, to help families dig new wells if needed, to organize alternative fishing expeditions to creeks and ponds away from the contaminated river. James Whitfield left without speaking to Isaiah, his displeasure evident in the set of his shoulders and the way he avoided eye contact. But enough others stayed to thank him, to ask follow-up questions, to offer help in spreading the warning to families who had not been present, that Isaiah felt the morning had been a success despite the controversy. Sarah waited until they were home and alone before speaking her mind. You handled that well. You gave them facts instead of vague warnings, and people respect facts. But Whitfield is going to hold this against you. He does not like being made to look foolish, and he will remember that you were right when he was dismissive. Isaiah nodded tiredly, suddenly exhausted by the stress of the morning. Monday afternoon brought the first visible evidence that Isaiah's warning was accurate. The river water, which had been its normal brown color in the morning, began to take on a reddish tint by midday. By evening, the color change was unmistakable. The Black Warrior River ran rusty red, looking disturbingly like diluted blood in the fading sunlight. People gathered on the banks to stare at the transformed water, some frightened despite Isaiah's explanation, others grimly satisfied that the preacher had been proven right. Children were kept away from the river, and anyone who had been planning to draw water from it quickly changed their plans. Isaiah walked down to the river that evening with Samuel Hawkins, both of them standing on the muddy bank, watching the discolored water flow past. Up close, the illusion of blood was even stronger. The iron-rich clay had turned the water a deep reddish brown that caught the light in unsettling ways. Thick sediment swirled in visible currents, and debris from the upstream construction, tree branches, chunks of bark, torn vegetation, floated past in steady procession. "It is worse than I expected," Samuel admitted, kneeling down to examine the water more closely. "That clay is thick. I would not want to drink this even after boiling it. The sediment would clog any filtering cloth, And you would still end up with gritty water that tastes like metal. Isaiah nodded, feeling vindicated and troubled in equal measure. He had been right about the danger, right to warn people, right to investigate the source, but being right did not make the situation any less serious. Families that depended on the river were going to face real hardship until the construction upstream was completed and the sediment had time to settle and clear. That could take months, possibly longer. How many families in the county draw their primary water from the river? Isaiah asked. Samuel thought for a moment, mentally tallying. Maybe 15 or 20 that I know of, mostly small farms and families who cannot afford to dig deep wells. They will be the ones hurt most by this. Over the next several days, the community mobilized to help those affected. Families with good wells shared their water, establishing schedules so that neighbors could come fill barrels and buckets. Thomas Brennan, who had a strong spring on his property, opened it to anyone who needed it. Margaret Henderson organized a rotation of women who would help families with young children by bringing them water directly so mothers would not have to make multiple trips daily. The crisis became an opportunity for the community to demonstrate the practical charity that rural life depended on. But not everyone was grateful for Isaiah's warning. James Whitfield spread word that the preacher had overreacted, that a little muddy water was hardly the catastrophe Isaiah had predicted, that turning minor inconvenience into community panic was irresponsible. Some people listened to him, particularly those who had not been directly affected by the river contamination. They began to question whether Isaiah had really predicted anything meaningful or had simply gotten lucky with his timing. On Wednesday, a family named the Collinses, who lived 3 miles downriver, brought their 8-year-old son Henry to Isaiah's door. The boy was sick, vomiting, diarrhea, fever, and his mother Emma was distraught. "He drank from the river Monday morning before we knew it was bad," she explained, tears streaming down her face. "Just a little. But now look at him. Is he going to die, Reverend? Please tell me he is not going to die." Isaiah examined the boy, who was clearly miserable but not appearing to be in immediate danger. The symptoms matched what you would expect from drinking contaminated water, some kind of intestinal infection or reaction to the heavy sediment. "Get him to Dr. Morrison immediately," Isaiah said. "He needs medical attention, fluids, possibly medication. This is beyond what I can help with." The Collinses left in a rush, taking Henry to the doctor in town. Isaiah stood on his porch afterward, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over him heavier than ever. He had warned people about the red water, had told them it was unsafe to drink, but apparently his warning had not reached everyone in time, or people had not taken it seriously enough, or children had been careless despite parental warnings. Whatever the reason, a child was now sick because of the contaminated river, and Isaiah could not help but feel that he should have done more. Sarah found him still standing there an hour later, staring at nothing. "This is not your fault," she said firmly. "You warned everyone you could reach. You gave them specific information about the danger. You cannot control whether people listen or whether children make mistakes. You did what you could." "Did I?" Isaiah asked. "Maybe I should have gone door to door instead of just preaching about it on Sunday. Maybe I should have been more forceful, more specific, more insistent." "You are not responsible for every person in the county, Isaiah. You are one man, a minister, not a miracle worker. You saw danger coming, you warned people, and most of them listened. That is more than most would have done." She took his arm gently. "Come inside. You have done enough." But Isaiah did not feel like he had done enough. Thursday brought news that spread through the community faster than any previous development in this strange affair. Henry Collins had died during the night at Dr. Morrison's house, his small body unable to fight off the infection caused by drinking the contaminated river water. He was 8 years old, the second youngest of 5 children, and his death hit the community like a physical blow. Emma Collins was inconsolable, and her husband John alternated between grief and rage, blaming the Carver plantation, blaming Isaiah for not warning them sooner, blaming himself for not being more careful about where his children played and drank. Isaiah felt the news like a knife to his chest. He had warned people. He had been specific about the danger, but a child was dead anyway, and no amount of justification could change that fact or ease the guilt that settled over him like a heavy cloak. He went to the Collins home immediately, arriving to find it already full of neighbors bringing food and condolences. Emma sat in a rocking chair by the fireplace, staring at nothing, her face blank with shock. John stood outside on the porch, his fists clenched, his jaw working with suppressed emotion. "Reverend," John said when he saw Isaiah approaching. His voice was flat, stripped of its usual warmth. "Come to tell me it is God's will. Come to explain how my boy dying serves some divine purpose." "No," Isaiah said quietly. "I came to say I am sorry. I warned about the river as soon as I understood the danger, but I should have done more. I should have gone house to house, should have made sure every family knew specifically not to let children near the water. I failed you, John, and I am sorrier than words can express." John's anger seemed to drain out of him, leaving only grief. "You tried to warn us. I heard about your sermon, I just did not take it seriously enough. Thought it was preacher talk, not real danger. Henry went down to the river Monday morning while I was working the far field, and Emma was inside with the baby. He was just getting a drink, just being a boy doing what boys do. How do you watch every second? How do you prevent every mistake?" His voice broke, and he turned away, shoulders shaking. Isaiah had no answers, no words of comfort that did not sound hollow and empty. He stood with John in silence, two men helpless before death, bound together by grief and regret, and the terrible understanding that sometimes warning people is not enough to save them. The funeral was held on Friday afternoon in a plot behind the Collins house, with what seemed like the entire county in attendance. Henry was buried under a young oak tree, wrapped in a quilt his grandmother had made, mourned by parents and siblings and neighbors who understood that his death represented something larger than one child's tragedy. It was a reminder of their vulnerability, their dependence on natural resources they could not fully control, their inability to protect their children from every danger despite their best efforts. Isaiah conducted the service, his voice steady despite the pain that threatened to overwhelm him. He spoke about Henry's short life, how he loved fishing and helping his father in the fields, how he made his sisters laugh, how he was learning to read and had been proud of mastering three-letter words. He spoke about the fragility of life and the importance of cherishing every moment with the people we love. He did not speak about warnings or predictions or what might have been prevented. Those thoughts were his burden to carry, not something to lay on a grieving family at their child's graveside. After the service, James Whitfield approached Isaiah with an expression that was difficult to read, not quite apologetic, but no longer openly hostile. "I was wrong," he said quietly, the admission clearly difficult for him. "I dismissed your warning, called it superstition and dramatics. If I had taken you seriously, if I had helped spread the word instead of undermining it, maybe more families would have been careful. Maybe that boy would still be alive." Isaiah shook his head. "We cannot know that, James. The Collins family heard the warning. They just did not implement it perfectly, and neither would most families. Children are unpredictable, accidents happen. Tragedies occur despite our best efforts to prevent them. You are not responsible for Henry's death any more than I am. But I made it harder for people to take you seriously," Whitfield insisted. "I have influence in this community, and I used it poorly. I let my pride and my skepticism override good judgment, and a child died. I will have to live with that." They stood together in uncomfortable solidarity, two men who had been at odds now united by guilt and grief, and the terrible knowledge that their conflict had real consequences beyond their personal disagreements. Around them, the community began to disperse, heading back to their farms and homes, carrying the weight of Henry Collins's death with them. That evening, Isaiah sat on his porch watching the sunset and thinking about the nature of warnings and the limits of human foresight. In the weeks that followed Henry Collins's death, the Black Warrior River gradually began to clear. The massive sediment load from the Carver plantation construction slowly settled out, though the water remained discolored and unsafe for drinking long after the initial crisis had passed. The community adapted to the changed conditions, establishing new water-gathering patterns, avoiding the river for drinking and cooking, finding alternative fishing locations in creeks and ponds. Life continued as it always did, absorbing tragedy and moving forward because there was no other choice. Isaiah found himself changed by the experience in ways he did not fully understand. He had seen danger coming, had warned his community, had been proven right, and yet a child had still died. The sequence of events did not follow any neat moral logic. He had done what seemed right, and it had been both insufficient and valuable. Lives had been saved by families who heeded the warning, but one life had been lost despite it. There was no clear lesson in that, no simple takeaway that made sense of the pain and complexity. The community's relationship with Isaiah had changed as well. Some people viewed him with new respect, even a kind of awe, seeing his prediction as evidence of special spiritual insight. Others remained skeptical, viewing the whole affair as coincidence inflated by hindsight. Most fell somewhere in between, accepting that Isaiah had somehow sensed danger and warned them about it without claiming to fully understand how or why. The controversy made him more widely known beyond Greene County, with other churches inviting him to speak and curious visitors showing up at his services. Isaiah resisted all attempts to turn him into some kind of prophet or seer. He maintained that what he had experienced was likely a combination of unconscious observation, intuition built on years of knowing the land and river, and perhaps divine guidance working through natural human faculties. He refused to make predictions about other future events, refused to claim special knowledge, and redirected attention away from himself and toward practical community preparation for natural disasters and human-caused problems. The Carver plantation construction continued for another 3 months, finally completing its massive land-clearing project in late July. By August, the river had cleared significantly, though it would be another year before the water quality fully returned to its pre-construction state. The plantation began producing cotton on its 2,000 newly cleared acres, shipping bales down the river to Mobile, profiting from the same waterway it had contaminated. Mr. Carver never apologized or acknowledged any responsibility for the river contamination or Henry Collins's death. In his view, he had developed land he legally owned, and any downstream effects were simply the cost of progress. Emma and John Collins slowly began to heal, though the loss of their son left a permanent scar on their family. Emma had 3 more children in the years that followed, and each one was watched with particular vigilance near water. The oak tree planted at Henry's grave grew strong and tall, a living memorial that shaded the family cemetery for generations. Samuel Hawkins rebuilt his house on higher ground, further from the creek that had destroyed his first home. He and Isaiah remained close friends, often walking the river together, observing the land and sky, discussing the subtle signs that indicated weather changes or potential problems. Samuel never asked Isaiah if he had other visions or premonitions, and Isaiah never volunteered information. They shared a comfortable silence that acknowledged mystery without demanding explanation. Sarah watched her husband gradually come to terms with what had happened, seeing him accept that he had done his best in an impossible situation. His sermons became more grounded after that spring, focused less on abstract theological concepts and more on practical Christian living, caring for neighbors, preparing for hardship, building community resilience. People responded to this shift, finding his teaching more relevant and applicable to their daily struggles. 5 years later, in 1855, Isaiah stood on the bank of the Black Warrior River on a clear April morning, watching the water flow past with its normal brown color, carrying no hint of the red clay that had once turned it blood-colored. His daughters were young women now, Martha engaged to be married and Grace studying to become a teacher. Sarah stood beside him, older and grayer but still steady and strong, still the foundation he built his life upon. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked. "Making that warning? Starting all of that trouble?" Isaiah thought about the question carefully before answering. "No. I saw danger. I warned people, and some lives were saved because of it. Henry Collins's death was a tragedy, but it was not caused by my warning. It was caused by contaminated water that would have harmed people whether I said anything or not. I did what I could with the knowledge I had. And if you had another vision like that, if you sensed something coming again, I would warn people again, more carefully, more specifically, with better follow-through to make sure everyone understood the danger. But I would not stay silent just because warnings are imperfect, or people might not listen. We do what we can with what we know, and we accept that we cannot control every outcome." They stood together in the morning sunshine, watching the river that had been at the center of so much turmoil flow peacefully toward the Gulf of Mexico, carrying the ordinary sediment of normal days, red clay and all toward the sea. The land had returned to its rhythms, the community had absorbed its lessons, and life had continued despite tragedy and controversy and the complicated nature of trying to help people prepare for dangers they cannot fully see or understand. Isaiah had predicted blood in the river, and the water had turned red. A child had died, and a community had been forced to confront questions about responsibility, preparation, and the limits of human foresight. There were no simple answers, no neat resolutions, only the ongoing work of living with uncertainty and doing the best you can with imperfect knowledge. That was the real lesson, Isaiah thought. Not that he had special insight, but that everyone must navigate an unknowable future with whatever tools they have, acting on incomplete information, accepting both success and failure as parts of the same human struggle. The river flowed on, indifferent to human drama, carrying Alabama's red earth to the sea as it had for millennia, and would for millennia more. Every family hides secrets, some so dark they should never see the light of day. Here, we open the doors to those shadowed pasts, uncovering hidden crimes, silent pacts, and stories that echo like ghosts through the halls of memory. If you've made it this far, it means you also carry that forbidden curiosity. So don't hesitate. Subscribe to the channel now, turn on the bell, and follow our next revelations. Because every day, new secrets emerge, and only those who dare to face the truth remain to hear them.